Watch right now on the Front News Project. Moscow was shaken by an explosion, retaliatory strikes from the armed forces of Ukraine. A new invasion from Belarus. Is Putin ready to go for Kyiv again? And how will the Ukrainian army respond? And once again, the Kremlin threatens with nuclear weapons. One of the NATO countries is in the crosshairs. Fiery, intense, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch right now. Greetings, this is Vladimir Timoshenko with you, and we begin right away with the main topic. Moscow and the Moscow region are facing the boomerang of retribution. Under drone fire were oil refineries, an oil depot, a defense industry facility, and other sites crucial to Putin's war machine. Putin, of course, has pulled all Russian air defenses into Moscow. However, this did not save the city and the entire capital region from a drone attack. So what is wrong with Russian air defense? And why is it powerless against the Ukrainian birds of Magyar? Let's watch the report.
The most massive drone attack on Moscow and the Moscow region since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
The air defense hit the neighboring building, the building across the street. Let me gather my thoughts, get myself together.
Comrades, Khimki is being bombed. This is absolutely terrible. I am completely and utterly shocked.
Residents of the capital and the Moscow region don't understand how, in the 5th year of the special military operation, they are being shelled so massively.
Everything was fine in Khimki. Everything was good, peaceful, and calm. And now suddenly, as you can see, some drones are unexpectedly flying in. This is a typical shocked reaction of a Moscow resident who, for a very long time, never even considered that something dangerous might fall on him from the sky as well. It just seemed completely impossible until now.
The air defense forces of the Moscow region reported that they have shot down more than 1,000 Ukrainian drones. Strikes were carried out on the Raduga Design Bureau, which develops cruise missiles, and the Solnekhnogorskaya fuel station, and perhaps the main target was the Angstrom microelectronics plant in Zelenograd.
This is the largest center in Russia for the production and development of various types of microelectronic circuits and devices. The air defense system around Moscow, which was considered completely impenetrable, turned out to be quite penetrable after all.
The Moscow region is the most fortified airspace zone. There are 4 layered lines of air defense. The outer ring surrounds the entire region. The second ring is the middle zone. The third ring is the near suburbs of Moscow. It runs along the MCAD and includes the inner city zone. Panzer systems are stationed on rooftops and towers in Moscow and its surroundings. Ukrainian drones managed to break through virtually all these barriers and deliver a massive strike.
Now, this unofficial and long-standing reputation of Moscow as a safe haven and a peaceful sanctuary from all the troubles brought by the ongoing conflict and the war has in general been very deeply and significantly undermined in recent times.
There is also a ring-shaped petroleum products pipeline around Moscow. It is a closed system over 400 kilometers long.
It consists of 3 lines through which petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, and aviation kerosene are delivered from the Moscow, Ryazan, and Kstovo refineries. The key LDPS station is Volgogradskaya. It receives, distributes, and pumps petroleum products. In addition to it, there are 3 loading stations. One of them is today's Pogorelitsa Solnekhnogorskaya. At these stations, fuel trucks are filled, which then deliver gasoline and diesel to gas stations. There are also separate branches from the ring leading to airports where aviation kerosene is delivered.
Some of these refineries have already been targeted by Ukrainian drones. Most likely there is active work underway aimed at shutting down the operation of this ring. The attack on the Moscow region showed that Ukraine can now deliver symmetrical strikes to the heart of the aggressor, and there are no longer any protected places in Russia. The parade of non-military vehicles on Red Square on May 9th is further proof of this.
And now, an analysis of the operational situation on the long-suffering Pokrovsk direction of the front. Fierce battles continue. In the Pokrovsk direction, our defenders repelled 32 Russian assault actions in the areas of the settlements of Rodinske, Novolexandrivka, Hryshain, Udakhne, Suketska, Ivanivka, Novashakova, and towards Mern, Beletsky, Serhivka, and Novopavlivka. And now another extremely important topic. Not only drones, but also Ukrainian missiles are tearing through Russia and striking fear into the Kremlin. Flamingos, Sapsans, FP-7 and FP-9 ballistic missiles. In short, the prospects for the Russians are quite bleak unless Putin sits down at the table for real negotiations and agrees to end the war in Ukraine on Ukraine's own terms. Here are the details.
Ukrainian missiles have flown toward Moscow. After a massive attack on the Russian capital, the so-called military correspondents across the border are no longer mincing words. After all, our cruise missiles were recorded hitting just 50 kilometers from the Kremlin. Ukraine has not officially confirmed their use, but judging by the scale of the aftermath, an ordinary drone couldn't have done this. At the same time, today in Russian social media, there are suggestions that after the drones, it was specifically Ukrainian flamingos that paid a visit to the White Stone City.
After the drones flew over, which they shot down, for example with S-300 missiles, when another Ukrainian drone missile comes flying, they simply don't have enough resources left. Again, let's remember that there are certain regulations regarding, for example, the reloading of air defense systems. And let's imagine when they have air defense systems. Panzer systems, for example, are stationed on towers. And this means, for instance, that it takes a long time to reload the ammunition. We understand the time gap that occurs between the opportunity to intercept an aerial target and destroy it.
Meanwhile, in Russia, Ukrainian missiles are flying around as if they're at home. Here, for example, is footage from a week ago. So Cheboksary, which had never before encountered Ukrainian missiles and drones, got acquainted with our flamingos. As it became known, the target of the missiles was the Enterprise JSC VNIR Progress, a facility of the Russian military-industrial complex. The enormous range of these missiles and their impressive warheads promise many more unpleasant surprises for the Russian occupiers deep behind the lines.
This is an ordinary cruise missile. It has been somewhat simplified so that mass production can be quickly launched. Well, generally speaking, missiles and cruise missiles are launched from containers or from aircraft. But for us, it's difficult to launch a heavy missile from an aircraft, right? In the case of container-based launches, it is necessary that both the propulsion engine and the wings are carefully positioned and stored inside the main body of the missile prior to its deployment. That's not very convenient. If we want to maximize the internal volume for placing explosives, then of course it's better to do it the way it has been done. That is, the wings are fixed and the engine is mounted above the fuselage, also outside the missile body.
When it comes to the internal components, the Flamingo has a significant difference from most of its cruise missile counterparts. The warhead weighs over a ton, making it more powerful than the legendary Tomahawk. The American Axe of Democracy has a warhead of only 450 kilograms. At the same time, the plant in Cheboksary is not the only success for the Flamingo this year. Earlier, missiles have already struck a facility in Udmurtia, which is 1,400 kilometers from the front line, and for over a month now, this has prevented the resumption of production. You have to understand, this is not just
about output on the Iskander. You have to understand, it's not just the production of Iskanders. They also produce Bulava components for Bulava ballistic submarines. Right now, we've shut down its production. Topol-M, a ground-based missile system, operational, tactical, and its modifications and Yars, with extended range, and that same damn Oreshnik with reduced range. So, taking everything into consideration, I would say this is the next generation of the internet, known as Web 2.0. And the Americans and whoever else, the various countries involved in this nuclear confrontation, can express their deep gratitude and offer their applause to Ukraine for significantly diminishing the strategic missile capabilities of Russia's nuclear triad.
However, the makers of the Flamingo also have some new products that the world has not yet seen in action. At the same time, according to rumors, they are already ready for use. And
this is nothing short of a monumental catastrophe. for the nation of Russia.
The Ukrainian ballistic missile called FP9 has already caused quite a stir in the military community because according to its technical specifications, it can reach the Russian capital, both the legal and the cultural one.
The FP7 is a kind of replacement for the ATACMS. It's cheap and has a short range. It's 300 kilometers and has a light payload. The FP9 is its counterpart, 800 kilometers, 850 kilograms warhead. Or, well, 850 kilometers, 800 kilograms warhead.
That very FP9 is currently the most advanced version of Ukrainian ballistic missiles, capable of flying over 800 kilometers. It will probably become the first serious threat to Moscow. After all, it's a domestic development, so partners won't be able to tell the Ukrainian armed forces where and how to use it.
Ukraine is fighting for independence, so the desire to be independent is deeply ingrained in us. Right now, we can't be completely independent in terms of skills and materials, but we are trying to minimize imports and rely on local production as much as possible. We are largely dependent on the help of our partners for funding, intelligence, expertise to develop the entire ecosystem, as well as for overall political support at various levels. When it comes to skills and equipment, we try to do everything ourselves.
Analysts are confident that it is precisely domestically produced missiles that will become Ukraine's most important argument in the upcoming negotiations. But before that, the Russian capital, and not only it, apparently will have to encounter several more innovations from the Ukrainian defense industry so that there are no questions left.
And now we move to the Huli Ipol sector of the front. The enemy is becoming more ferocious here as well. So in this sector, the occupiers carried out 24 attacks in the areas of the settlements of Zlahoda, Varvarivka, Dobropoleya, Yeleno-Konstantinivka, and towards Novo Zaporizhzhia, Vozdvizhevka, Starukrainka, Zheleznodorozhne, Huli Ipolske, and Charivne. There is no smoke without fire. Rumors about a possible offensive against Ukraine from Belarus have real grounds. And the Belarusian dictator himself, having dropped the mask of a neutral peacemaker, announced a partial mobilization of Belarusians and ordered preparations for war. How will Ukraine respond to this? Robert Brovdi-Magyar has already responded. How exactly? We'll show you now. Lukashenko has dropped his mask. The Belarusian dictator is preparing a second front for another Russian march on Kyiv. Rumors about preparations for an invasion have turned into real actions, as personally stated by Volodymyr Zelensky on his social media page.
Russia is considering plans for operations to the south and north of Belarusian territory, either against the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction in Ukraine or against one of the NATO countries.
Lukashenko himself is no longer hiding his desire to go to war. At a meeting with Belarusian generals, Batka made it clear that his army should prepare for an offensive.
There's no way forward without a ground operation.
Thus, Belarus is refusing to conduct large-scale exercises. Instead, partial mobilization is being introduced in the country.
We will selectively mobilize units of the armed forces in order to prepare them for war.
Moreover, Lukashenko is not limiting himself to just Ukraine. According to intelligence, the Belarusian dictator, with the support of the Russian army, is considering the option of invading one of the Baltic countries.
This would involve seizing a small part of the territory of one of the Baltic countries. And the calculation is based on the idea that this seizure will present European countries with a dilemma: to either start a semi-scale war with Russia, in which case Eastern Europe, at least its capitals and infrastructure, would become targets for Russian missile and drone attacks, or try to reach an agreement without an invitation.
Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are already on alert and waiting for provocations on the Ukrainian-Belarusian border. Our defenders have turned Policia into a fortified defensive line. Now, there are kilometers of field fortifications built there, along with hundreds of revetments for equipment and firing positions. The military also reported that a complex system of minefields, ditches and barriers has been created. So, a repeat of the February 2022 scenario is unlikely. And as analysts assure, despite all the maneuvers and loud statements, in reality, Lukashenko is unlikely to dare to attack Ukraine.
The absence of serious groups on the border with Ukraine the absence of large-scale mobilization. In other words, for now, all of this exists only as scare tactics. That is, as long as we do not see the movement of significant formations toward the border, we are ready for defense.
But the Belarusian army is clearly not ready for an attack. By getting involved in a military conflict with Ukraine, Lukashenko could lose his country. And this is not just a figure of speech. When faced with well-trained and highly motivated Ukrainian fighters, his army doesn't stand a chance. On the very first day, hundreds of drones will fly toward Minsk and Gomel, and the regular army will easily cross the border and march toward the Belarusian capital.
And suddenly Ukraine enters. Several battalion tactical groups come in hard, knocking out the professional Marines who are not prepared for defense but only for advancing into foreign territory, crushing the conscript border guards who have never participated in combat at all. And this basically applies to the entire Belarusian army, you could say.
Not only will the Ukrainian army face little real resistance, but most Belarusians will gladly switch sides to join the Ukrainian armed forces and go off to overthrow their unchanging dictator.
Since Belarus is not a huge country and its population is quite homogeneous, mobilization and the need to die for the Russians could lead to a repeat of 2020 in the country, that is, to massive protests involving millions, but this time with weapons in hand and with a powerless Russia behind Lukashenko. Because over these years, the Kremlin has sold off all its power, both economic and military.
So all the saber-rattling and loud, provocative statements by Lukashenko about an impending war are nothing more than another information psychological operation and a tool of pressure, analysts assure. The mustachioed dictator regularly uses military rhetoric whenever he needs to bargain something from Russia, money, privileges, or political support. That is exactly what is happening this time.
It's clear that Lukashenko will wriggle out of this any way he can, like a hedgehog, a snake, anyone really, because he has absolutely no interest in participating in this war. Belarus's economy has already declined in this first quarter. In Russia it's 4%, in Belarus it's 5%, and it's only going to get worse, because they're tied together, the situation is lousy, although...
Nevertheless, Putin continues to put pressure on Lukashenko.
We continue to observe Russian attempts to further draw Belarus into the war against Ukraine. We know that there have been additional contacts between the Russians and Alexander Lukashenko aimed at convincing him to join new Russian aggressive operations.
So, just in case, Ukraine is preparing for the worst, namely to repel an attack from its neighbors. And although such a scenario is unlikely, it cannot be ruled out. Well then, now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Constantinfka front. The Russian world continues here as well to destroy, kill, and maim. On the Constantinfka front, the enemy carried out 22 attacks near Constantinivka, Ivanopilia, Ilinivka, Rusin Yar, Toretske, Shakhove, Sofiivka, and in the direction of Volne and Kucheryavy Yar. Nuclear weapons are once again in the spotlight. So, Russia is building up its capabilities and continues to issue threats. But while Putin is resorting to nuclear blackmail, his army is preparing a new offensive. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Russia is now actively considering plans for military operations against the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction from the territory of Belarus and is also working on scenarios for attacking NATO countries. Let's take a closer look at how real these threats from the Kremlin terrorists actually are.
This was stated by the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Kyrylo Budanov. But he immediately adds that this is not a matter of technical capability but of a political decision. And most importantly, there are currently no signs of preparations for such a strike.
Scare tactics regarding nuclear weapons. This was back in 2022, when Medvedev was openly telling everyone that, God forbid, if something hits Crimea, there would be a nuclear strike on Ukraine, on Europe, something like that. Well, the first ones did fly over. I remember on August 9th, 2022, the first missiles flew over. Then the SPU guys launched their Sea Baby drones into Sevastopol Bay, and a few other things happened. That's why we'll keep hearing this from time to time, because Russia has no other argument.
Nevertheless, Russia's nuclear potential remains a serious threat. Analysts note that Moscow is ramping up its capabilities at the fastest pace since the Cold War. This is not just about missiles, but also about a general strengthening of military presence near NATO's borders. Russian authorities are also actively using nuclear rhetoric. In particular, Vladimir Putin has spoken about the need to ensure strategic security and has mentioned new missile systems that can carry nuclear warheads. According to experts, such statements are a form of pressure and intimidation.
Risks of using nuclear weapons. Well, such risks always exist. But I think we need to understand a very simple yet crucial thing. If the Russian leadership and military truly believed that using tactical nuclear weapons would immediately lead to Ukraine's total capitulation, and that they would face no catastrophic consequences for it, for example, from China, the United States, or other major nuclear states and the international community, then it is highly probable that they would have done it long ago. So we will keep hearing about this, but I think that first and foremost, China is categorically against it, and they have honestly warned Russia not to mess around.
At the same time, Russia is preparing new strikes against Ukraine. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukrainian intelligence has obtained documents indicating preparations for missile and drone attacks. Among the targets are nearly 24 sites, including political centers and military posts. Ukraine is already responding. The defense forces are strengthening their protection and are also preparing both military and sanctions-based responses. The president notes that every Russian strike will have consequences. At the same time, another risk remains from Belarus. According to Ukrainian authorities, Russia is trying to involve Minsk in new operations. This concerns possible actions both against Ukraine, particularly in the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction, and against NATO countries. Infrastructure is already being created on the territory of Belarus that could be used for an offensive. However, according to Ukrainian border guards, there are not enough forces there for a full-scale attack. Despite all the threats, Ukrainian authorities emphasize that the key factor remains the state's ability to resist. Because it is precisely this, and not attempts at intimidation, that determines the real balance of power and the course of the war. Ukraine will, without a doubt, defend itself and its people if Alexander Lukashenko makes a mistake and decides to support this Russian intention as well.
They will keep firing until the end of the war. Our task, well, what strong leverage do we have? Here it seems all we can do is respond. Strikes of impact, strikes to destroy the oil and gas infrastructure, and much more, just to make the Russian economy collapse.
Therefore, the nuclear scenario remains possible but not inevitable. Russia continues to exert pressure, threaten, and prepare new strikes. But the decisive factor still remains not weapons but political decisions and Ukraine's ability to defend itself.
And now, an analysis of the situation on the Kupansk and Lyman fronts. Let's be honest, these are sacred targets for Putin and all his entourage. Accordingly, the situation here is also extremely tense. On the Kupiansk front, the Russians attacked twice in the direction of Petropavlivka and Kupiansk-Uzlovyi. On the Lyman front, the enemy tried 8 times to break through our defenses, attacking towards the settlements of Lyman, Yampil, Drobyshev, and Zarekne. And now Russian drones can be shot down from anywhere in the world. Ukraine has created a system in which a drone operator can be thousands of kilometers away from the battlefield and still destroy Russian Shaheds or Gerans. In other words, you can shoot down drones even while sitting, for example, in New York. We will tell you more about this in our report.
Shooting down Russian Shaheds while sitting in New York, Ukraine has created a system that just a few years ago seemed like science fiction. Now, a drone operator can be hundreds or even thousands of kilometers away from the battlefield and still destroy Russian Shaheds in Ukrainian skies. The Ukrainian defense cluster Bray 1 spoke about this new technology.
As of today, Ukrainian pilots can control anti-aircraft drones from anywhere in the world, and that is quite literal. In other words, a pilot in Ukraine could shoot down an Iranian Shahed attacking a country in the Persian Gulf, while someone in America could take down a Russian Geran attacking Ukraine.
We're talking about interceptor drones, cheap unmanned aerial vehicles that are already being called a new class of weapon. But it's important to note here that we're talking specifically about control, not about launching. Previously, drones were both launched and controlled from the same location, but now launching and controlling them happen in different places.
By separating these functions, the threat to the operators themselves is reduced, but the physical drone still needs to be delivered to the launch site. And the point of this interception system, for example, with drones from the company Dikasherzny, is as follows. It lies in the fact that there are certain locations where they are installed. There are no operators present at those sites anymore. And if necessary, when it becomes clear that a launch needs to be made from that location, an operator who is very far away can launch the drone and control it remotely.
Ukraine was the first in the world to scale up the use of such systems directly in warfare. By the way, this same system is already helping Ukrainian deep strike drones strike oil depots in Russia.
For example, consider the advanced P-1 Sun interceptor drone, or as it is affectionately known by its operators, the Pisyun. This sophisticated system allows for efficient remote launching and precise remote interception of targets, such as the Shahed loitering munitions. Furthermore, this very same versatile system was extensively used and strategically deployed for the purpose of controlling various long-range strike drones during recent operations.
Today, it is Ukraine that is setting the rules of the game. It is our drones that shoot down, eliminate, and strike targets in Russia. So skillfully, in fact, that Russian air defense cannot shoot them down. And here is the proof of that. Recordings of Moscow's air defense communications during the May 17th attack have surfaced online.
The Ukrainian language and its culture.
Drones have forever changed the tactics of warfare and the very concept of war around the world.
This whole new subject has turned the thinking of both NATO and non-NATO generals upside down regarding how this war is actually fought and what tactics are used. Do we even need the kinds of aircraft we have now? What are these planes supposed to do? What kind of air defense should there be? What are the requirements for this air defense? Because Russian air defense has turned out to be almost incapable of handling any more or less serious tasks.
But most importantly, the tactics of defense have changed. Ukrainian engineers have essentially created a remote air defense system. Now an operator can control a drone not only from another region of the country, but from anywhere in the world. At Bray 1, they claim that a pilot located, for example, in New York, is theoretically capable of controlling an interceptor drone that destroys a Russian UAV over Ukraine. We're talking about remote control technology, which has already been integrated by more than 10 Ukrainian defense companies. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine and Bray 1 are now scaling up this system as a separate branch of air defense.
Remember, in 2022 to 2023, we kept asking, give us Abrams, give us Challengers, give us tanks, give us Leopards, and so on. Where are they now?
If previously air defense relied primarily on expensive systems like Patriot, now some of these tasks can be handled by inexpensive FPV interceptors controlled via secure digital channels. And while other countries are only beginning to study this experience, Ukraine is already applying it in real combat conditions every day.
That's all for today, but very soon on Front News, you'll see new, unique reports from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, brought to you so that you know the truth. This was Volodymyr Tymoshenko with you. Take care of yourselves and your loved ones.